Question? It's very important. I think that's, art is such a expression of the self. I mean, and here's an interesting thought, just a sidebar on what you've asked. If you were the only person alive on Earth, would you do artwork? I mean, maybe you would, but the real point of artwork is a communicative thing. You're putting yourself out there. It's not unlike being a singer. Here I am on stage, I perform a piece, and I get a reaction. Without that interaction and reaction, I would debate what's the point of it all. So I think the more of you that goes into a piece, the more powerful, the more important it is. I think that one of my fears about technology is that we might lose the self. I think that's one of the visions that NASA had when they said, listen, here we've got this technological thing, this a zillion moving parts on the space shuttle. What about the human aspect of it? I mean, even though we might, who knows what the future brings? No one knows. Brilliant people have tried to guess. No one's ever been right. But the long-term vision of human beings is who knows what. So my fear is that as we become more machine-oriented, which we are. I mean, I'm wearing machines. I mean, I have cell phones and glasses. Glasses are a machine, which were a fortunate invention for middle-aged people like me because we can still read. It's a great item, but it's a machine. So we're becoming more intimate with machines, but we don't want to lose our human quality. And I think that's one of the things art so genuinely, especially the kind of art that I've seen here in the tunnel, because I feel the human element. I don't feel the mechanics as much as I do when I look at a space shuttle. So I think if we lose our humanism, I think that's a dangerous thing. So no, you want to show that as much as you can. Yes. Uh-oh.
Hi, Dad.
Here comes trouble. That's my daughter, Camissa, yes. Hi.
My question to you, I've always wanted to ask you this. Of your two children, which is your favorite child?
Of my two children, which is my favorite? I have a son and a daughter, and this is my daughter.
Just kidding.
Who works at the CVC. And is that really your question?
It's not. It's not. No, I already know the answer.
You already know.
So it's fine. Okay. It's so wonderful to see you here. I always love to hear you talk about your artwork because it's something that you've never really done. You don't need to do it because your artwork speaks so well for you, so it's always fun for me to hear about it. I do have a question I've always wanted to ask you, though, in the 27 years that I've known you. And your artwork is always inspired by either the natural level on a very close microscopic level or on a macroscopic level of space. You've painted space and the Earth for 30 years. Have you ever wanted to go into space?
So the question is, have I ever wanted to go into space?
Yeah.
Not after reading that book that we're reading about about how you go to the bathroom in space. I don't know if I do. No, actually, there was a time when I was in the NASA art program and back in the 80s, before the Challenger accident, when there was a lot of talk about, well, we'll send a teacher and we'll send John Denver because he's a songwriter, and we'll send an artist. And actually, John Young, the first person to fly the space shuttle, he said, an artist should have been there. He gave a speech one time and he said, and an artist should have been there. So there was this idea, and actually, in those times, I was one of the people they had talked about because I was reasonably healthy then, and but then everything changed after But that doesn't answer your question, Camissa. If the offer was made, how could you refuse? Even knowing the risk, it's probably much more dangerous to drive a car, but to see even just to go into Earth orbit would be something that would be. I mean, how could you even measure that with anything? So I guess the answer is yes. I do not want to go on the Mars mission. That's too long. That's 2+ years. I don't want to do that, yeah. But thanks for your question. Now get back to work.
I have a question for you over here.
Oh.
Could you shed some light on the mystery of not just valuing art, but pricing it, whether you're a successful artist or a new artist? Like, how would you,
How do you set the price for your art?
Yes.
That's a very straightforward and very good question. You know, why does a Mercedes cost, you know, $70,000? Well, it's a quality thing, but also it has a proven track record that people will pay $70,000 for it. So in part, that's part of the answer. You know, is a Van Gogh painting of sunflowers, is it really worth $80 million? Well, it's, you know, like any piece of artwork, it's irreplaceable, no matter what scale and value. So, you know, price becomes a very strange sort of commodity but you're not really asking that question. You're asking it in realistic terms of, you know, how do I price my painting? Well, the first art show I ever had, I sold framed pieces of work. I think the least one was $65. And then when I finally broke $500, I thought that was amazing. And it was probably 1980. I got $1,500 for a work, and I can't imagine that I was ever happier. You know, even though I get much more than that now, I can't imagine that I was ever happier than when I got $1,500 for that painting. I thought, over $1,000, it's incredible. But so it is sort of it's a perspective thing. You know, what stage in your career? I'm probably the wrong person to ask in terms of, you know, the value of money and how important it is, because it's not one of my big things. I mean, you do need money to survive. Your real question is, how do you price it? And it's the realistic, hard, dry answer is what the market will bear. If you have 10 paintings and you've had them in a show and several of them sold for $5,000, then maybe that's a realistic price. Now, if you have a bunch of paintings and they all sell out really quickly, maybe your prices are a little too low. So it has to do with your reputation, and by reputation I mean, well, how well your work is known. Is it in an important collection? You know, does President Clinton have one of your paintings? Does that make my artwork more valuable that President Clinton owns? Well, he actually has a few of my paintings. Does that make my artwork more valuable? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. So things like that, what collections, who owns your pieces, who's written about your pieces. Well, my paintings are in such and such an art book and so forth. Those all indicate that you so have more value. Does that in any stretch answer your question? Yeah. So there was a question in the back there. That gentleman had a microphone.
I wanted to know if you use mostly references for your paintings, or are you drawn from your imagination?
Both. Some of my most successful paintings have been from the imagination. I didn't talk about it, but I'm glad you asked the question. I often build models, like the earth on the doorstep. I actually built a little doorway that's about that high based on one of the places that we saw in Italy. So it's an actual three-dimensional model that I built out of wood and painted to look old, you know, with the stucco and so forth. And then a little earth, and I actually took that outside, and I love to be able to play God and sort of change the angle. Well, I want the sun to shine this way, you know, and then I want to be able to look at the piece of at my setup, my still life. I want to be able to look at it from this angle or from that angle. So again, that is drawing from life, but it's also using the imagination. I'm not the first person to do that. Many artists have used models or models and models. I mean, people and created things. Winslow Homer, the very famous American artist, a lot of his figures, he had these kind of Barbie doll people, and he had different clothes, and he would kind of put them on there and twist them around. You know, it was kind of a creepy thing, but it really worked for him. You know, and he could get an idea about a pose, and so, you know, as an artist, you use whatever tools you have. The piece that I did for Barbara Morgan with the shuttle and the books, I actually went out in my driveway on a sunny day. I used 2 step ladders. I strung up I had a nice 1/72 scale model of the shuttle, and some books and a belt and an apple, and I suspended those all on wires. It took about 2 hours just to set it up, and then I started working on the painting. And just about that time, the UPS driver came up. And he couldn't imagine what the hell was going on with that one. But you know, that's the sort of thing I like to see, how the sunlight falls on something. So that's my advice for that. And you can never beat the imagination. I think it was who was Van Gogh's buddy? Paul Gauguin, who said, when you paint from the imagination, the spirit soars. And so anytime you can draw on something from your mind. I remember early on, when I first went up to Maine, I got to show some of my paintings to a fairly well-known artist. His name was John McCoy. He was actually Andrew Wyeth's brother-in-law. And I was going through my portfolio, and I was quite proud of this one, and I was quite proud of that one. And then there was one I came to, and I kind of flipped through it really quickly. And he said, "Well, what was that one?" I said, "That's nothing. That's just one I did from my imagination." And he said, "That's why it's your best piece." So that was a really interesting lesson. Never downplay the imagination. Any other? Yes, sir. Yes, the list is long. The list is long of among a short five. My top 10, my top 5 artists. I love Maxfield Parrish, who was more of an illustrator than an artist. John Singer Sargent, whose figurative work I think is among the best ever done. Frederick Edwin Church, the great landscape painter, who's painting Niagara, which is in the Corcoran Gallery of Art here in Washington. When it was completed, people said it was the best painting ever done, ever. It's an amazing painting. So Church, certainly someone like Winslow Homer, of course Michelangelo, and all the big guys. I'm pretty in awe of. And living in Washington is so fantastic because these shows come here, and you also have things that are on permanent display. So it's really a haven for artists. So that, yeah, I'm sorry I can't give you but there's many people. Yes, sir. Other doors than having your work shown here at the Capitol. Well, how did you learn about this art exhibit?
It was through school.
Through school, okay.
Really obscure.
And when you first heard about it, did it seem like, well, that's a dumb thing to do, or that's really cool?
At the time, it seemed like a really odd thing. It was very indescript, and I just said, "What the? Yeah, go ahead and go and do it."
Well, again, so see, you really took a chance. You kind of went forward and said, "Well, I'll do it." But are you glad that you did it? Very glad. I mean, here you are in the Capitol building. Did you ever think you'd be in the Capitol building with a piece of artwork? Okay. So see, that's one thing that goes on your little bio is that, hey, I've shown work in the Capitol building. It's almost as good as having your work in orbit. It's actually better. It's actually